This is Ryan Finkelstein, host of Locked On Mets, and on today's show, I was joined by Mets beat writer Pat Ragazzo. We talked a little bit about this current team and their struggles and whether it makes any sense for Jacob deGrom or Noah Syndergaard to return this year. We talk a lot about their search for a new president of baseball operations and some of the big names that have been attached to that job, and Theo Epstein and Billy Beane. And we also talk about the impending free agency of guys like Marcus Stroman and Javier Baez. We'll get to all of that in just a minute.
You are Locked On Mets, your daily New York Mets podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Once again, happy to be joined by Pat Ragazzo, Mets beat writer for SI. You can find him on Twitter at Ragazzo Report, and we're going to talk about some of his latest reporting around the Mets. First off, you've been watching this team up close and personal at Citi Field this past week. Coming off of that series against the Yankees to what we've seen since, I mean, what's just been your take of what you've been watching?
Well, when the Mets pulled off probably their most dramatic and exciting victory of the season on Sunday Night Baseball against the Yankees. Of course, Lindor had the 3-home run game and pretty much stamped his arrival to the city where he's going to spend, the next decade under contract with the Mets. But they just came out flat against a very good surging St. Louis Cardinals team that's now moved into the second wild card spot in the NL. And they basically didn't even put up a fight other than in the middle game of that series that went into extra innings, of course, and then the Mets were out of arms besides Jake Reed, and everyone else was taxed in there. So, yeah, I think this week pretty much just solidified that the Mets will not be playing in the postseason this year. Of course, they entered Monday, as I said, with a chance. But again, in another big moment, another big stretch, they came up small. And then even with the Phillies coming to town on Friday, they lost the first two games and were able to salvage at least one game last night. It was a feel-good win, but at this point, they came up small, after following the Subway Series on this homestand and basically are completely out of it at this point. 5.5 back in the NL East with 12 games left to play. And they were 3.5 back in the wild card, I believe, as of a week ago, and now they're 7 back and there's no chance there. So, yeah, it's just more so now has us talking a lot more about what they're going to do in the offseason, because at this point the season is just the season's over. Unfortunately, they were 54-46 on July 28th, had a 5-game lead in the division, and they're 19-31 since and 5.5 back, and that's just the way it's gone the last 2 months. It's been pretty dreadful.
Yeah, I think that sums it all up. And with that, I'm just curious how they played these last few weeks out here. Noah Syndergaard and Jacob deGrom are both coming off injuries. And I know for Syndergaard, there's been some talk about maybe getting him back at some point this week. I even saw. What have you heard about Syndergaard, and why even risk throwing either of these guys on the stretch for what's a lost season at this point?
Right. So Syndergaard faced live batters at Citi Field yesterday for the second time this past week. Now that it's a new week. And Luis Rojas was saying that they're still discussing whether they're just going to activate him on this road trip when they go up to Boston and then go out to Milwaukee to take on the first place Brewers. But at this point, like Syndergaard threw 10 to 15 pitches in his latest live BP. He's not necessarily ready, I think, to face major league hitters after, testing positive for COVID and having his second rehab stint derailed for probably longer than at least I expected him to be out. So I think, honestly, at this point, like there's only 12 games left and rehab assignment should be the direction he goes to actually pitching in a game, maybe get 2 appearances this week and then activate him over the weekend in Milwaukee. And my colleague, Tim Healy from Newsday, actually reported that yesterday that the Mets are leaning towards at least sending him out on that rehab assignment and hopefully either getting him back next weekend or this upcoming weekend or at the beginning of next week when they come back home to face the Marlins. And I think that's the best route. And at this point, obviously, it's not like you're bringing him back to help you make a push for the postseason. I think that's lost at this point. But Syndergaard hasn't pitched in 2 years. And, it would be nice. And I know the Mets want to see him pitch in live action, especially given the fact it's going to be interesting that he's coming out of the bullpen as a reliever and he's not throwing a slider or a curveball. So you just want to see what he has in major league games, even if it's only for a couple games down the stretch, given how much time is left. So I think Syndergaard, at least on that, on that note, like it does make sense to bring him back, but it just doesn't make sense to activate him right away. I think he does need a third rehab assignment. And I wrote yesterday from my site Inside the Mets on Sports Illustrated and Fan Nation that the Mets are hoping the third time is the charm with Syndergaard, because now this is going to be his third rehab assignment he started this year, and hopefully it ends with him, winding up back in the big leagues. I know everyone's, and including himself, he's worked hard to get here, and it's just been a very long time for a very good player. And the other fact too is that he's about to be a free agent, and the Mets are going to decide whether they're going to give him the qualifying offer or not. And the qualifying offer, I believe, is probably around 18 mil, between 18 and 20 mil again. And it's just at this point, are you going to dish out that cash for a pitcher who, there's so much uncertainty and a big question mark, hasn't pitched in so long, is coming off major elbow surgery. So maybe like last year, Marcus Simeon's a guy who I kind of think in this sense, and Simeon's different. He's a hitter and he wasn't injured or anything. He had been playing, and the Oakland Athletics, they had a chance to offer him a qualifying offer, and they only offered him, I think, a 1 year, like $12.5 million deal, I believe, with like $10 million deferred down the road, given their budget, of course, in Oakland. But the Blue Jays wound up dishing out the 1 year, $18 million to him, and he's killed it. He's hit 40 home runs this year for them. And Toronto, of course, is surging right now. They look like the team no one wants to play in October right now. So how these two, players and situations relate, I think, while they do play different positions and pitching, it's a whole different aspect in Syndergaard's situation, that maybe the Mets do offer him a 1 year deal that's maybe worth like $10 million or less, because at this point, paying a guy $20 million who hasn't pitched in 2 full seasons, basically, it just kind of doesn't make sense. But that's going to be something that's interesting, and I guess we'll see how that plays out.
Yeah, I think that's I didn't even think about that they could maybe, instead of offering the qualifying offer, come in below that. That would also free up Syndergaard, though, to have maybe a little bit more of a robust market to try to get a 1 year deal from somebody else if there's no draft compensation attached. So that's definitely something they're going to have to weigh, whether it's worth it to not give him the qualifying offer. Because maybe if you do give him the qualifying offer and he declines it, you get him back on a team friendly deal anyway. Talking about the other pitcher who could come back, but it seems even less likely, I would imagine, is Jacob deGrom. Is there any point at all? This is your entire franchise is based on one play. He is the franchise guy. You still want him to be around for a very long time. What's the point in bringing deGrom back?
Well, yeah, I guess right now it doesn't really seem to make much sense to bring him back, given where the team is and given what the injury turned out to be. And there was such a question mark surrounding him, and the Mets were persistent in the fact that it wasn't serious. It was only elbow inflammation. And then finally, a couple of weeks ago, Sandy Alderson revealed that it was a UCL sprain, which is the lowest form of partial tear of the UCL, which, of course, the UCL, the ulnar collateral ligament in the elbow, is what pitchers get Tommy John on, which is obviously always scary when talking about your ace and the best pitcher in the world. So, yeah, it kind of is, it's unorthodox the way the Mets have approached it, but as Sandy said, the situation seemed to resolve itself. The ligament's fully intact. And deGrom, they were never going to rush him back, whether they were in contention or not. They're just taking it super slow with him. A source told me, actually, at the end of August, that once deGrom was cleared to throw again, the Mets were basically putting him in a spring training routine, which takes pitchers 4 to 6 weeks to, build up their arm strength and be ready to pitch in games. So that's kind of the track deGrom's on. But at that point, it didn't even leave him enough time to come back this year. So at this point, deGrom's only throwing off the mid slope. So he's not even throwing off the full rubber. He's only throwing 10 to 15 pitches. And the next step for him, as Luis Rojas told us, was he has to throw off the full slope. And then the next step after that will be facing live batters. So at this point, there's only 12 games left. And it seems highly unlikely that he would come back at this point, because he couldn't come back without a rehab assignment anyway. So it just seems highly unlikely. And what that same source that I referenced earlier told me as well is, if deGrom doesn't make it back, they're hoping that he's going to be able to throw a simulated game against live batters in October once the season's over. And I think at this point, that's probably the most realistic target. But when you revisit the timeline of deGrom, back in mid-August, a different source close to the situation actually told me that deGrom, they were a little concerned with his MRI at that point, and he was 99.9% done for the season, that he wasn't coming back in a regular season game. And at that point, the Mets were still calling it inflammation. But a couple of weeks later, Sandy Allison told us what was really going on, and now it makes a lot more sense why we haven't seen him in a game since July 7th. So, yeah, the Mets he's too important of a piece to kind of, take any chances with him, and that's why they're taking it so slow. And they want to eliminate a lingering question mark going into next season. But even if he pitches for an inning, and like say it's the final series in Atlanta of the season, or even a simulated game afterwards, he's still going to be a question mark. And I guess the best thing for him is just to rest up and hopefully come back healthy next year and be able to make it through a full season. But whatever happens and whatever we do see of him in the end of this season and early part of the offseason, he's still going to be a question mark coming into spring training next year. There's no doubt about that, the way this season's played out.
All eyes are on the gridiron as teams are back for the start of another football season. And as always, BetOnline is your number one spot for all the pro and college football action this season. With the new updated site and interface, there is now even more odds, props, and contests at betonline.ag, which continues to be your number one source for everything football. Head to the website or use your mobile device to sign up today and receive your 100% welcome bonus. That's double your initial deposit just for signing up. Don't forget to use the promo code NFL100. From football, basketball, baseball, and boxing, right to your favorite Vegas casino games, don't wait to take advantage of all the amazing offers available for the 2021 season. BetOnline is your fastest and easiest way to bet on all of your favorite sports. BetOnline, your online sportsbook experts. That ties directly to Marcus Stroman, because you go into next year, and I was just talking on another podcast. Yes, the Mets have Jacob deGrom, Carlos Carrasco, Taijuan Walker, and potentially Noah Syndergaard if he comes back, maybe all factor into that rotation. But if that's the case, all of them have question marks. Syndergaard, deGrom, injury concerns. Carrasco, I mean, I don't know if his injury concerns really impact next year as much as the other two, but he is a pitcher in his mid-30s. Taijuan Walker certainly has him in the second half. Marcus Stroman been by far the most consistent pitcher on this team, taking the ball every fifth day, being good more times than not. Yet I know that you have done some reporting on what his market could be. So what's the situation with Marcus Stroman heading into the offseason, and what's the likelihood he comes back to the Mets?
Right. So the word around the industry right now is Marcus Stroman probably will draw a minimum of $25 million a year, given the season he's posted for the Mets. He's ninth in the league with a 2.88 ERA, and he's pitched the most starts in the majors with 31. He's pretty much been their most consistent and reliable starter this year. The only issue with him is that he hasn't necessarily given them much length, and they haven't really given him the opportunity to pitch more than 5 or 6 innings in most starts. He's only pitched in the 7th inning a few times this year. And for him, though, he's going to be probably the top starter on the market come this offseason. And I believe Max Scherzer is going to be a free agent too. But Stroman will be up there as one of the top starters available on the market. He's going to be a hot commodity. And honestly, the Mets should do what they can to retain him, given all the question marks that you just referenced in the rotation. There's quite a few. So Stroman would be that one, that one answer in the rotation that, they'd be wise to bring him back. But at the same time, you don't know what he's going to get. I believe he's going to be 31 next season. And I'm hearing maybe 6 years, 5-6 years is what he's going to be looking for. And obviously the $25 million a year minimum. So who knows which way the Mets go, but if they don't bring him back, the rotation is going to be a big uncertainty going into next year. And you can't go in relying on too many question marks as they're already going to be, even if they bring back Stroman. And the Mets have a lot of very good players from this team who are going to be free agents who they should retain. But then at the same time, you can't necessarily just bring back the same team and expect different results. So I think whatever does happen, Steve Cohen's going to have to dish out a ton of money just to be able to compete next year for a playoff spot. And they're going to have to blow past the luxury tax, whatever that new number is after the CBA negotiations. So yeah, there's a lot of work to do. And, that's another sense. And I guess we're about to get into it anyway, but Whoever they bring in as president of baseball ops, hopefully it better be a very viable candidate, because there is a lot of different things that they're going to need to address from a personnel standpoint, and from probably a coaching standpoint too, and maybe a general manager. There is a lot of work to do, and it seems like they're kind of going to pull a rabbit out of the hat. But getting the right baseball person in there running things at this point, which is something they've lacked and something they lacked this year, that's where it all starts, of course.
Yeah, I think we should just get right into it, because that's been something I've been talking about a lot the last couple of weeks, because obviously the team on the field hasn't warranted much discussion, and it makes you think about the future. And there's been a lot of people reporting different things, whether it's Mike Hill was a name that seemed to be a little bit of a reasonable choice because there isn't another team that he's already working for. Theo Epstein has been, of course, a hot name. He's working in the commissioner's office. You have Billy Beane, who has burst onto the scene now as a potential candidate, although he's still tied to Oakland. And David Stearns being another name the Mets are interested in, but there has been no indication the Brewers will let Stearns interview for another team. I know you've done some reporting around Theo Epstein. Does this seem like a viable option? And is this more a matter of the Mets are interested, or is Theo potentially interested in the opportunity as well?
Right. So starting with Hill and Stern, or David Stearns, I should say. Hill he already interviewed for this position last year, and the Mets, they didn't take him. They passed over him, and they wound up not filling the position at all. And David Stearns, the request for the Mets to interview him was blocked by the Brewers owner. So nothing tells me that they're going to get that permission to interview him anyway this year. And I don't think he'd leave Milwaukee, given what he's built over there and the situation he has. It's kind of just, it's a good thing. And he'd kind of be going to take on a pretty big challenge with a lot of pressure surrounding it in New York, of course, and a lot less patience than in Milwaukee. And regarding Theo and Billy Beane, I think those two probably are the two top names right now. And I did hear that Theo Epstein will definitely be in play for the Mets. And John Heyman, I believe, has reported on it too, that, the Mets are targeting, their short list is Epstein, Beane, and David Stearns. So I think it's probably either Beane or Epstein at this point. Epstein, we've heard that he probably wants an ownership stake, so it just depends on whether Steve Cohen's willing to get that with him. But then Billy Beane also is a realistic candidate, of course, because of the Sandy Alderson connection. Alderson was his mentor, gave him his first shot in Oakland. They had a lot of success together. Beane and Alderson both know how to kind of make nothing into something, I should say, with budget constraints, which they wouldn't have here. So Beane's in the final year of his deal with Oakland. The Athletics are, thinking about moving to Vegas, given their messy stadium situation with the city of Oakland right now. So if they do, in fact, talk about moving to Vegas, Beane, I don't think will go with them, and maybe Fisher might let him go. Ken Rosenthal actually said in The Athletic, too, that the reason why Fisher, the A's owner, might let Beane go to the Mets is because he could just promote David Forst, who is their GM right now, to president of baseball ops and have him stay the GM, which makes a lot of sense and probably is what's going to happen when Beane's deal runs out anyway at this point. And Beane, I believe, is going to be 60 years old next year, and this is his last shot to run a big market Northeast team with a massive payroll, and his career would come full circle because the Mets picked him as the number 1 overall pick as a player in the 1980 MLB draft. And then, of course, the reunion of Sandy's, makes this automatically in play. So Beane, if the Mets get permission from Fisher, I think Beane's definitely a realistic candidate. Beane's currently the VP of President of Baseball Ops with the A's. So I don't know. I mean, this might be considered a vertical move to be the president of baseball ops with the Mets, but I'm not so sure given Beane's decision making and just everything he's done with the A's. So I don't know. I feel like maybe what Beane has done for the A's might allow the owner, to give him permission, given the fact that they have a successor in place already and Forst. So it's definitely something to keep an eye on. And remember, Beane turned down the Red Sox job to run their baseball ops department after Epstein left, I believe, a couple of years ago. And like I said, like this is definitely his last shot, I think, of his career to have this kind of position in a big market team. And it just all comes down to whether he wants to leave his home in the Bay Area, his family and everything, like, and make the move across country. But, it might be worth his while, and, maybe it might happen. I think it's really probably going to come down to Epstein and Beane. And for the Mets' sake, they better hope that it comes down to those two, proven guys, because that's what they need at this point, to kind of save this franchise that has gone through the same dysfunction and disappointment this year under a new ownership group in Cohen, which it's been a colossal failure in year one, from the hires to, what's played out on the field, to the injuries, to the disappointment and the epic collapse following the trade deadline. It's just the Mets kind of need that, that right person in place. And a guy like Beane or a guy like Epstein has done it before and has won championships, and they would make Cohen's goal of winning a World Series in 3 to 5 years, that more realistic.
You've got one device that lets you catch the game live, another that lets you stream your favorite shows, you're watching your sports highlights on your phone, and you've got your neighbor's best friend's login for the other good stuff you're missing. Well, I want to tell you about a simple way to get all that entertainment you love without the hassle, and a great way to finally get your TV together. It's called DirecTV Stream, and it brings your live TV and on-demand favorites together like never before. So you can watch your favorite sports, movies, and shows all in one place. That means no more juggling remotes, no need to buy another device ever again. And the best part, there's no annual contract. So get rid of the clutter and the confusion. Get your TV together with DirecTV Stream. You can learn more at directv.com. That's directv.com. Compatible device required. Content varies by package. One reason to repair and maintain your cars is to save money. So why would you choose to spend 30%, 50%, maybe even 100% more for the exact same auto parts at a chain store or new car dealership that you could just get at rockauto.com, a family business that's been serving auto parts to customers online for 20 years. They have everything you could want, from engine control modules to brake parts, tail lamps, motor oil, even new carpet. Whether it's for your classic or daily driver, get everything you need in a few easy clicks and have it delivered directly to your door. The rockauto.com catalog is unique and remarkably easy to navigate. Quickly see all the parts available for your vehicle, then choose the brand, specifications, and prices you prefer. Go to rockauto.com right now and see all the parts available for your car or truck. Right locked on in there, how'd you hear about us box, so they know that we sent you. Amazing selection, reliably low prices, all the parts your car will ever need. rockauto.com. Yeah, I think if you talk about last offseason during the search, we heard not necessarily these exact names, but a lot of big names, and then they ended up with Porter and Scott. So it's hard to just completely say yes, they're gonna get. I mean, when you're talking about just name recognition of general managers in professional sports, is there two guys that have better name recognition than Billy Beane and Theo Epstein? Billy Beane, of course, with Moneyball, and Theo, ending the two biggest curses in American sports. So to me, it's very exciting for a fan's perspective to hear these names as viable options. And you can certainly make the argument that it makes sense for both of these guys, but the argument against it, I think, is something that maybe people aren't paying enough attention to, as far as, is Theo Epstein going to risk his sterling reputation to come into this situation where it could go sideways and he could certainly look bad, or he could stay and do what he's doing and kind of be retired as an executive and focus on working in the league office. For Billy Beane, there's no pressure in Oakland. I mean, every year he comes in, they cobble together a roster. They're really successful. If they make the playoffs, it's a success. And I'm sure there's still that pull to win a World Series for that franchise he's spent so much time with. So I think that on paper, these candidates make a lot of sense, but I do wonder, could we get into that situation again where the Mets strike out on Theo, they strike out on Beane, and once again, you're interviewing the Zach Scotts of the world to take over this team?
Well, with Epstein, at least, he was so burnt out with the Cubs job that he needed a year off. But the word is that he wants to get back into running a team, but he wants to have an ownership stake if he does that. So that's, kind of what will play out, I guess, if the Mets do wind up landing him. And it could come between whether, he wants to come here or not, or if Cohen's willing to give him that stake. And it'll probably only be like a 4% stake. So it's not really that big of a deal, at least from my perspective. And then with Billy Beane, you mentioned Moneyball. it'd be not only be great for the Mets, but it'd be great for baseball to have him come in and take over, one of the most valuable teams in sports, one of the most marketable teams in the league, and a guy who was literally played by Brad Pitt in a movie to be running the New York Mets, who, are a flagship organization in Major League Baseball. So I think it would be great for baseball. It'd be great for the Mets. Obviously, there's certain things could play out where it doesn't happen. But when you mentioned last year, like the Mets weren't able to get anyone they wanted, and that's mainly because they were blocked by the Brewers. They were blocked by Oakland when they wanted to interview David Forst. All the guys who they really wanted, who were at the top of their list, they were blocked at. So Epstein, they wouldn't be blocked to talk to him. So that's another reason why he's automatically in play. And the Beane situation, I don't believe that he would get blocked there with Oakland, given everything that's going on there and having Forst waiting in the wings. So I think those two names definitely. Now it's no guarantee that they want it and that it happens, but I think at this point those two names are probably more realistic than any of the other guys who are probably worthy of taking over the job. And it's funny that you mentioned Scott and Porter, of course, because those are actually Epstein guys. Both of them. Scott, of course, worked for Epstein for a number of years in Boston, and Porter was working for him in Chicago, where that whole scandal went down with the female reporter. So, yeah, it's unfortunate how those two hires played out, but the Mets need an adult in the room running things, and those two guys are, guys who are very successful and probably still up for the challenges, especially with Epstein. He's only 47 years old, and this is the ultimate place that those guys would want to be. As much pressure as it is, these guys are successful. They have egos. They have track records. I don't think it's something that either of them would shy away from. And I think Cohen could make it worth their while. And they both know that the success that you have, especially with the Mets, if they bring a championship back to the Mets for the first time, and it'll be 36 years next year, the last time the Mets won the World Series, but it's definitely worth their while. And with Epstein, it would totally, I mean, his career, both of their careers are already, solidified, but it would just make their legacies even stronger. And on the case of Beane hasn't won a World Series. So that's something that definitely he could, if he did it, and if he did it in New York, at Oakland, it's not going to happen at this point, especially with 1 year only remaining on his deal and given his age and everything. The Mets would give Beane that opportunity to finally win a title and not have any blocks or constraints with the budget there. So I just think that aspect definitely makes it enticing for both of them, and more so Beane, of course.
I just want to do some quick math before we close here. How much did the Mets sell the team for, or how much did Cohen buy the team for? Was it 2.1?
2.4 billion last year.
2.4 billion. All right. So 2.4 billion. That is, how many zeros do I got to put here? Jeez.
A lot.
All right.
Think of it too. The Mets, even without re-signing all of the, the impact players they have right now who are about to hit the free agent market, the Mets are tied up with like $165 million payroll already with the contracts they're going to still have remaining on their team. So when I said before about them having to blow past the luxury tax, they're going to have to. And, bringing back some of those guys should be a priority. Maybe Conforto on the qualifying offer as well. And then, at the same time, maybe bringing in a Castellanos if and when he opts out. I think he will with the Reds, because he's been having an MVP type year in Cincinnati, and he has an opt-out clause in his contract for this upcoming winter, and everyone I think expects that he's going to opt out, and myself included. And I think he would be the perfect fit for the Mets, especially like if they were able to retain Conforto for one more year, and then Castellanos could replace him after the year. So I think, and would probably jolt that lineup. And with front offices, and I've talked to Zach Scott about this in the past, the front office always looks at who's a bounce back candidate. So I think with the Mets, you can't rely on this whole lineup being bounce back candidates, but guys like James McCann and Jeff McNeil, I think, are going to be the two guys who they do rely on in that sense. And I think McNeil will turn it around next year. And, he's too good of a hitter not to. And the Mets just need a coaching staff. And here's actually another point I wanted to bring up. I think with the Mets, their problem is their coaching staff too, as well as why all these players have had, down seasons compared to what they've done in the past, is because the Mets have a bunch of minor league coaches coaching the major league team who haven't been able to help these players get through their struggles this year. And the Mets need, they need major league voices, and they need better coaching next year. And they absolutely need a hands-on, a better approach offensively because they're the worst situational hitting team in the league. Like getting a runner in from third with less than 2 outs is like it's like trying to get out of a maze for them. They've been one of the worst teams in the league in those situations. So I think the coaching staff's going to play a big role next year too, and I think we're going to see a lot of new faces and should.
Yeah, the reason though that I wanted to bring up the 2.4 billion dollars is 4% of 2.4 billion is 96 million. So if Theo Epstein or Billy Beane, and Billy Beane has a 4% stake in the Athletics right now, if either of them gets a 4% stake in the Mets, that's very significant, and that could tip any scale. So I think that certainly is a huge part of what makes this team attractive. You can do the math on what 1% would be. It's a very valuable franchise right now, and getting ownership in it is certainly something that either of these guys would really appreciate. Thank you so much for coming on the show once again. Why don't you tell everyone where they can find all your work?
Yeah, of course. Thanks for having me. And find my work on Twitter at Ragazzo Report, Ragazzo. And then you can find all of my work and my stories, my daily articles at si.com-MLB-Mets, which is titled Inside the Mets for Sports Illustrated and Fan Nation. So it's been a fun year. It's flown by, and looking forward to what this offseason brings. It should definitely be interesting based off this conversation and all the stories we've been covering recently in the news.
Absolutely. I'm sure we'll have you on a bunch throughout the offseason as there'll be a lot of Mets news to cover. So looking forward to that.
Likewise. Thanks for having me on again.